An Indian Pilgrim by Subhash Chandra Bose, Chapter 5 at School, Part 2. It is strange how your opinion of yourself can be influenced by what others think of you. In January 1909, when I joined the Ravenshaw Collegiate School, Cuttack, a sudden change came over me. Among Europeans and Anglo-Indians boys, my parentage had counted for nothing, but among our own people it was different. Further, my knowledge of English was above the ordinary level, and that gave me an added estimation in the eyes of my new classmates. Even the teachers treated me undue consideration because they expected me to stand first, and in an Indian school studies and not sports brought credit and reward. At the first quarterly examination, I did justify the hopes placed in me. The new atmosphere in which I lived and moved forced me to think better of myself, that I was worth something and was not in an insignificant creature. It was not a feeling of pride that crept into me, but of self-confidence, which till then had been lacking, and which is the sine qua non of all success in life. This time it was not the infant class which I joined, but the fourth class, so I did not have to look up all the time. Boys of the fourth class considered themselves as belonging to one of the higher classes and moved about with an air of importance. So did I. But in one respect, I was seriously handicapped in spite of all the other advantages I enjoyed. I had read hardly a word of Bengali, my mother tongue, before I joined this school. While the other boys had already reached a high standard, I remember that the first day I had to write an essay on cow. I was made the laughing stock of all my classmates. I knew nothing of grammar and precious little of spelling, and when the teacher read out my composition to the whole class with running comments punctuated with laughter flowing in from all sides, I felt humbled to the dust. I had never had this experience before, to be laughed at for deficiency in studies, and on top of it, I had lately developed a species of self-consciousness which had made me ultra-sensitive. For weeks and months, the Bengali lessons would give me the creeps, but for the time being, however acute the mental torture, there was nothing I could do but put up with the humiliation and secretly resolve to make good. Slowly and steadily, I began to gain ground, and at the annual examination, I had the satisfaction of getting highest marks in that subject. I enjoyed my new surroundings, no more so as I had longed for the change. At the other school, though I had been there for 7 years, I had not left behind any friend. Here it looked as if I would enter into lasting friendship with at least some of my classmates. My friends were not of a sporting type because I did not take kindly to sports, and only the drill lessons interested me. Apart from any own lukewarmness, there was another obstacle to my taking to sports enthusiastically. It was the customary for the boys to return home after the school hours, have a light tiffin, and then go out for games. My parents did not like us to do that. Either they thought that sports would interfere with our studies, or they did not regard the atmosphere of the playground as congenial to our mental health. Possibly the latter consideration weighted more with them. Be that as it may, the domestic situation was such that if we wanted to go out for games, we had to do it on the sly. Some of my brothers and uncles did to do so, and occasionally, when they were caught, were given a talking to. But knowing my parent habits, it was generally possible to dodge them, especially as they were in the habit of going out for a drive and a walk. If I had a strong desire like others, I could easily have joined them at games, but I did not. Moreover, I was then of a goody nature and was busy Devouring ethical verses in Sanskrit. Some of these verses taught that the highest virtue consisted in obeying one's father, that when one's father was satisfied, all the gods were satisfied, that one's mother was even greater than the one's father, etc. etc. I therefore thought it better not to do what would displease my parents, so I would take to gardening along with those who did not go out for games. We had a fairly big kitchen and a flower garden adjoining our house, and in company with the gardener, we would water and tend the plants or do some digging or help lay out the beds. Gardening I found absorbingly interesting. It served, among other things, to open my eyes to the beauties of nature, about which I shall have something to say later on. Besides gardening, we would also go in for physical exercise and gymnastics, for which there were arrangements at home. Looking back on my past life, I feel inclined to think that I shall not have neglected sports. By doing so, I probably developed precocity and accentuated my introvert tendency. To ripen too early is not good, either for a tree or for a human being, and one has to pay for it in the long run. There is nothing to beat nature's law of gradual development. However much prodigies may interest us at first, they generally fail to fulfill their early promise. For 2 years, life rolled on in much the same way. Among the teachers and the students, there were both Bengalis and Orias, and the relations between them were quite cordial. One did not hear, in those days at least we students did not hear, of any ill feeling and misunderstanding between the people of the two sister provinces. So far as the members of our family were concerned, we could never think or feel in the terms of narrow parochialism and provincialism. For that we have to thank our parents. My parents had extensive contacts with the people of Orissa and intimate personal relations with distinguished Oriya families. His outlook was consequently broad, and his sympathies wide, and they unconsciously influenced the rest of the family. I cannot remember ever to have heard from his lips one single disparaging remark about the people of Odisha, or for the matter of that about the people of any other province. Though he was never effusive in his emotions and was inclined to be reserved, he could endure himself to all those who came into the contact with him, wherever he happened to be at the time. Such parental influences work unrobustly, and only in later life can the children discover by a process of analysis what helped to mold their character or give their life a definite direction. Of the teachers, there was one who left a permanent impression on my youthful mind. That was our headmaster, Babu Beni Madhav Das. The very first day I saw him taking his rounds, and I was just over 12, I felt what I should now call an irresistible moral appeal in his personality. Up till then, I had never experienced what it was to respect a man. But for me to see Beni Madhav Das was to adore him. I was not old enough then to realize what is was that I adored. I could only feel that there was a man who was not an ordinary teacher, who stood apart from and above the rest of his tribe. And I secretly said to myself that if I wanted an idol for my life, it should be to emulate him. Talking of an idol, I am reminded of an experience I had when I was in at the PE school. I was then about 10. Our teachers asked us to write an essay on what we would like to be when we were grown up. My eldest brother was in the habit of giving us talks on the respective virtues of a judge, magistrate, commissioner, barrister, doctor, engineer, and so forth. And I had picked up odd things from that I had heard him say. I jumbled up as many of these as I still remember, and wound up by saying that I would be a magistrate. The teacher remarked that to be magistrate after being a commissioner would be an anticlimax, but I was too young to understand the status of the different profession and designations. After that, I had no occasion to be worried by the thought of what I should aspire to be in later life. I only remember hearing in talks within the family circle that the highest position one could get towards Indian civil services. The headmaster did not usually give any regular lessons to till the boys reached the second class. So I began to long for the days when I would reach the second class and be entitled to listen to his lectures. The day did arrive, but my good fortune did not last long. After a few months, orders for his transfer came. However, before he left us, he had succeeded in rousing in me vague perception of moral values and incorrect feeling that in human life moral values should count more than anything else. In other words, he had made me feel the truth of what we had read in our poetry book. The rank is but the genuine stamp, the man is the gold for all that. And it was well that I had for about this time the usual mental changes best described in scientific terminology as sex consciousness, which are incidental to approaching puberty, began to overtake me. I remember vividly the parting scene when the headmaster Beni Madhav took leave of his devoted and admiring pupils. He entered the classroom visibly moved and in a voice ringing with emotion said, I have nothing more to say but invoke the blessings of God on you. I could not listen anymore. Tears rushed into my eyes and I cried out within myself, but 100 eyes were on the alert and I managed to restrain myself. The classes were then dismissed and the boys began to file off. Passing near his room, I suddenly saw him standing in the wrath watching the boys depart. Our eyes met. The tears which I had managed to restrain within the classroom now began to flow. He saw them and was also moved, and I stood paralyzed for a moment, and he came up to say that we would meet again. This was, I believe, the first time in my life that I had to weep at the time of parting, and the first time I realized that only when we are forced to part do we discover how much we love. The next day, there was a public meeting organized by the staff and the students to accord him a farewell. I was one of those who had to speak. How I got through my part, I do not know, for internally I was all in tears. I was, however, painfully surprised to find that there were many among the staff and the students who did not realize at all what a sorrowful event it was. When the headmaster spoke in reply, his words seemed to pierce through my soul. I could hear only his opening words saying that he had never expected when he first came to Cuttack that there would be so much affection in store for him. Then I ceased to listen but continued to gaze at his impassioned countenance, which spoke volumes to me. There was an expression, a glow there in which I had seen in the portraits of Keshav Chandra Sen, and no wonder, since he was Keshav Chandra Sen's ardent disciple and devotee. It was a now different school altogether, so dull, uninteresting, and uninspiring for a light that he had either shone there had vanished. But there was no help. The classes had to be attended and lessons learned and the examination taken. The wheel of life grinds on regardless of our joys and sorrows. It is interesting how you can sometimes come nearer to a person when you have parted from him. This happened in the present case. I started correspondence with headmaster Beni Madhav, which went on for some years. One thing I now learned from him, how to love nature and be inspired by her. not merely aesthetically but ethically as well. Following his instruction, I took to what, in the absence of anything better, might be described as a species of nature worship. I would choose beauty spot on the river bank, on a hill, or on a lonely meadow in the midst of an enchanting sunset glow, and practice contemplation. Surrender yourself completely to the nature, he would write, and let nature speak to you through her protein mask. This sort of contemplation had given him peace of mind, joy, and strength of will. How far I profited ethically from this effort I cannot say, but it certainly opened my eyes to the hidden and neglected beauties of nature, and also helped me to concentrate my mind in the garden among the flowers, sprouting leaves, and growing plants. I would find an indescribable joy, and I would love to ramble alone or in company of friends amid of wild beauties of nature with which the countryside was so plentifully supplied. I could realize the truth of what the poet has said: a promise by the river brim, a yellow promise is to him, and it is something more. World War's poems now had an added significance for me, and I would simply revel in the descriptions of natural scenery of in Kalidas poetry and in the Mahabharata, which thanks to my Pandit I could enjoy in the original Sanskrit. I was at this time entering on one of the stormiest period in the physical life, which was to last for 5 or 6 years. It was a period of acute mental conflict causing untold suffering and agony, which could not be shared by any friends and was not visible to any outsider. I doubt if a growing boy normally goes through this experience. At least I hope he does not. But I had in some respects a touch of abnormal in my mental makeup. Not only was I too much of an introvert, but I was in some respects precocious. The result was that at an age when I should have been tiring myself out on football field, I was brooding over problems which should rather have been left to a more mature age. The mental conflict, as I view it from this distance, was a two-fold one. Firstly, there was a natural attraction of a worldly life and of worldly pursuits in general, against which my higher self was beginning to revolt. Secondly, there was a growth of sex consciousness, quite natural at that age, but which I considered natural and immoral, and which I was struggling to suppress and or transcend. Nature worship, as described above, was elevating and therefore helpful to certain point, but it was not enough. When I required, and what I was unconsciously groping after, was a central principle which I could use as a peg to hang my whole life on, and a firm resolve to have no other distractions in life. It was no easy job to discover this principle or idea and then consecrate my life to it. My agony could have been terminated or at least considerably mitigated if I had either given in at outset, as so many have done, or had with one bold effort of the will fixed on an idea and heroically brushed aside all other allurements. But I would not give in. There was a something within which would not let me to do so. I had therefore to fight on, and a stiff fight it was, because I was weak. For me, the difficulty was not about the determination of a life's goal so much as about concentrating my entire will to that single goal. Even after I had decided what was the most desirable object in the life, it took me a long time to establish peace and harmony within myself by bringing under control contrary or rebellious tendency. For though the spirit was willing, the flesh was weak. A stronger will than mine would undoubtedly have managed things more easily. One day, by sheer accident, stumbled upon what turned out to be my greatest help in this crisis. A related of mine who was a newcomer to the town was living next door, and I had to visit him. Glancing over his books, यहाँ पे पार्ट ए समाप्त होता है।